Well, good morning everybody and welcome to this session on social-mediatisation of politics. First of all, I'd like to thank the sponsors for the event, Electionista, Tweetminster, as we probably know them here in Westminster rather more, and we will be hearing from Alberto and Nardelli in the second section. Basically today, there are two sessions which are going to look at the issue of the impact of social mediatisation on politics. The first is going to look at the impact on the politicians. The second is going to look at the impact on campaigners and NGOs.
Facebook, I joined Twitter 2007, 2008. I was elected in 2010. So my experience from the start of being an MP has always been shaped by social media, by interacting with both my local constituents and national organisations and national people online as well as offline. And that's my second point, is that I approach this debate with a big deal of caution, which is the presumption I think people make that somehow some of the concerns, some of the constructs, some of the things that you have to be aware of offline don't apply online. I think there's a real danger, particularly when people approach campaigning, and I think throughout it, Jaume, when you talk about the Becky Grillo example, it could not have existed in a vacuum. And just as we don't tweet in a vacuum, we don't hold public meetings in a vacuum, we don't talk to our constituents in a vacuum. So forever that I think it's important that people do embrace and use the potential of technology and social media to interact, to communicate, to engage. If you think that doing that in itself as a politician, and I say that as somebody who's seen some of my colleagues on all sides of the House kind of tweet their press releases and kind of bitten my knuckles in fear about it, then I think you make a very strong mistake, because you forget the context, you forget people's concerns about political engagement, some of those bigger, deeper trends I think Jane's talking about that apply online as well as offline. And I think that's my third point as well, is I think as we go on, people's experience of engagement online with politicians is also different for different groups of people.
And so often, I think in this online world, what's most effective is the ability to get on the agenda an issue that people hadn't previously thought about or hadn't previously been concerned about. But if the issue is already on the agenda, it's only very rarely that the volume is sufficient to actually sway people's views. And I think that's partly because on each individual point the numbers are often quite low. It's also that often online activity makes us do more, but it makes us do it badly. You know, it's so easy to click a button to email an MP, to send a tweet to somebody, etc., that it encourages us to do more of that, and that's very good in many ways, but it doesn't necessarily encourage us to do it in a way that is most effective. And I say us because, you know, I include myself as much as anyone else in this.
The biggest mistake is to presume that you can communicate online in the same way that you might in Parliament. And so there's sort of three key points from my perspective on effective digital communication. I'm keen to get people's thoughts on later. So I think the first one is to share compelling content around issues, not ideologies. You know, the best politicians on Twitter deliver compelling content, and that's often in the form of the issues they're working on, rather than the political ideologies that they believe in and define their politics. And really that engagement is at a level where people will find it easy to understand. You know, people engage with other people, they engage with their stories. So, for example, Stella's work on payday loans really engages with people because they're affected by it. And I think, you know, that's very much more effective way of communicating than trying to tap rows over minutiae on policy, which we do unfortunately see too many MPs on Twitter doing. So, for example, in Eastleigh, the Conservatives parroting the Tory party line earlier this year, that didn't engage with the constituents, and not necessarily why they lost that election. But you know, to use that as an example again, the loan shark campaign is effective. It's simple messaging. It's about issues that people care about, rather than just policy terms. Of course, it's related to the party politics, but you know, and her politics in particular. But she, you know, messaged it very effectively. The second point is that it's a two-way dialogue. You know, you might feel like you're being bombarded with information, but that means that there's a huge space for dialogue through social media. Politicians who put up barriers to that conversation will be the ones that are most out of touch with their constituents and potential voters, I think. You know, can politicians really expect the public to engage with them if they're not actually engaging or providing engaging content? You know, the top political tweeters that we might, you know, talk about often, Stella, I've mentioned on payday loans, Tom Watson. I think somebody was saying, Alberto was saying that he's sort of the person most followed by journalists. providing engaging content on phone hacking, or Zach Goldsmith on Heathrow expansion. They're conversing with their followers on those issues again. And thirdly, already mentioned, is that online is simply another tool. It might sound surprising for someone who works on online on a web platform, but online is just merely a tool for political activism. It's not a means in itself. So don't assume that they're different. You know, they're inextricably linked, as Stella also mentioned earlier.
Essentially, whenever we talk about politics and the internet, one of the things that we're dealing with is the eternal dream of politicians. And the eternal dream of politicians is to get back in direct contact with the electors. That's what they dream about. That there won't be a media. That there's nothing in between. That you can go out there with your extraordinarily good and courageous and wonderful and fantastic messages and so on, and commune directly with the voters. And one of the things that a lot of politicians have, quite a few politicians have believed, is that somehow or other the internet was now this thing. Sure, the era of great public meetings broke down some time ago, where you could orate to your constituents or meet them directly, but now you're going to be able to do it in a completely different way. They would pick you up on social media or on the internet and see what your message was. You wouldn't have to read it as it was covered by the Daily Mail or something like that. And there you were. You'd be, you wouldn't have to tailor your message all the time for what the media were going to do with it. This, in a sense, is, so bear in mind that this is a kind of great dream, and a lot of people have this dream in one way or another about the internet. The problem is that it's not working out like that. It was never really going to work out like that, but it doesn't work out like that. And it's quite interesting to see how and why it does. The way in which Twitter works to the best effect for politicians is to let the existing media or the developing media know what they're doing, and to create a buzz around it, which then feeds into stories which appear on television, radio, and in newspapers. And in fact, the biggest impact is not direct to the voter at all. There is a little bit of that, but that's not the way it works. And partially, this is because, and we'll come back to this maybe later, when we're talking about our online metrics, we can look at the numbers, followers, etc., but none of us really knows what they mean. The idea that social interaction on social media is somehow not as good as the face-to-face meeting, the activism, etc. You have got to get rid of this concept of not as good as, because it is as good as it will be. That is what it is going to be. That is what it is going to consist of. Every now and again it will break out into something else, something more physical, etc. But that is, by and large, how people will increasingly make their contact. And that is what those are the constraints that you're going to have to live within. And what that means is, answering Jaume's point about we've got to remember those people who don't know how to use social media, it is the same point as dealing with people who in the past were actually illiterate, voters who were illiterate. You have to teach them to read and write, because there's nothing that you can do about them being left out if they don't understand how to use social media. There's no compensation you can form for them in the future. You're going to have to teach them.